Hi, in this video we're going to walk you through all the steps to make a high quality forever shed. Plans for this shed are available in the link in the description. We put a lot of time into this plan, making sure it's efficient as possible, that it saves you both time and money when you go to build it. We'll also have plans for different sizes of this same shed style. Start on a flat level surface or prepare your final surface. Lay out the 4x4 post. If it's not completely flat and you're building to move like we're doing, go ahead and shim it up. Cut all of the boards for the floor framing using a circular saw or a compound miter saw. Lay out the top and bottom plates. Even though this is a floor, it's built just like a wall. And then lay out your joist. We're going to use the 16D nails to nail the entire floor system together. If you don't have a framing nailer, screws 3 inches long that are self-tapping can be used instead, but it's going to be more expensive and more time consuming. For this small of a floor, we're just using 2x4s. If you were building a larger floor, you may consider using 2x6s. The joists are 16-inch on center, so the plywood works out in later steps. So now how to attach the floor framing to the posts underneath. You can use brackets or you can use scrap 2x4s like we're doing here. Nail them to the post and then to the 3 sides of the floor framing. Take a square of the floor before you tack it all down and ensure the 2 opposite diagonals match exactly. Adjust if necessary. With your floor framing square, go ahead and tack down through the blocking in the centers and on the ends. Now for the floor sheathing, start with a full 4x8 sheet. It does not need to be cut. Line up the outside factory edges. Notice how it lands exactly in the middle of a stud. If your plywood panel isn't working out, your floor framing may not be perfectly square. Adjust as necessary. Switch to the 8D nails. The nail pattern is normally every 12 inches and then 6 inches around the perimeter. Once you have your first sheet done, cut the second sheet using a circular saw and nail it down. Repeat these steps for the next row of plywood. Stagger the plywood seams for the most strength. It may be easier to finish nailing off after you're completely done. Do this by marking all of the studs and then drawing string lines between your marks. Then you can just go back and nail along the string line. The nail gun makes this quick and easy, but if you don't have a nail gun, you can use screws. It's just going to be more time consuming and expensive. With the floor done, this gives us a great starting point for building all of the walls. Make sure your shed floor is perfectly level. Now lay out your walls on top of the shed floor. Mark both the top and bottom plates 16 inches on center, and then lay out all of your studs. Just like the floor, we'll use the 16D nails to nail the walls together. Once a wall's done, go ahead and move it out of the way and work on the next wall. There'll be 2 side walls, a back wall, and a front wall with a doorway in it. With all the walls done, we can start standing them. We'll start with the side wall. Nail that down flush along the outside edges. Then stand the back wall and nail it along the bottom edge and to the first side wall. Then just add the remaining side wall and tack it along the bottom edge into the back wall. Finally, the front wall. Just move it in place and tack it along the bottom and to the side walls. If the floor is level, the walls can be plumbed up with a level. With all the walls plumb, we can add the top plates. The front and back top plates are added first. These tie the front walls in with the side walls. Then the side wall top plates are added and nailed down. With the wall framing done, we can start working on the roof framing. To make life easier, we set the ridge pole up with some blocking, and then we just marked out the rafter framing. If you're using the plans, the rafter framing is detailed out in the plans. Doing it this way decreases the amount of high ladder work. Notice we've also marked out the rafter placement on the ridge pole just so we don't have to do that up in the air. Now to cut the rafters, we're doing a 5/12 pitch, which is about 23 degrees. The rafters are all cut long point to short point. Now we need to cut the bottom corner of the rafter off so it sits flat on top of the wall framing. Just mark it with a speed square, so there's 3.5 inches left, and then cut it with a circular saw. Once you have one rafter cut, use it as a pattern to cut the remaining rafters. Next, mark out the side walls for the rafter placement, and then start attaching your rafters to the ridge and the walls. You can use the 16D framing nails or the 3-inch screws here. We felt like the screws were easier, but either will work just fine. Where the rafters intersect, you will need to screw at an angle on the second rafter that you set. Make sure you also screw to the sidewall top plates. With the rafters up, now we can do the T111 siding. First, take a measurement of the sidewalls plus the ends of the rafters. We'll cut our T111 siding down to this length. The T111 siding panels are awesome because they're both a sheathing and a siding panel. So it's a finished product and a structural product. Make sure you read the install guide that comes with the T111 panels. We found a QR code on the inside of the panels that we scanned to access this information. We used a block at the base to help us set our first panel. Since we stuck to a 16-inch on-center stud pattern, the panel works out perfectly. So we can nail the second edge right to the stud and then lap the next panel right over that and nail it all to studs. These walls are only 10 feet long, so we'll need to cut 2 feet off of a panel to fill in that last piece. We're using the 8D nails to attach. The leftover piece we'll go ahead and start the second side with. Make sure the panel lines up with the studs in the wall. From there, we can add the remaining 2 panels. On the end, there was a slight lip that we had to trim off with a circular saw. You want to do a good job installing, but remember, all the corners will end up getting covered in trim. Attach the back wall panels to the back. We ran it long, we'll trim those top corners in the next step. We did the same for the front panels. But before we put that last panel, we need to mark out the doorway so we don't box ourselves out. Carefully measure the doorway and transfer those measurements to the outside, and then use a straight edge to mark out the opening. With the doorway marked, we can go ahead and finish adding the remaining T111 piece. Use a circular saw to carefully cut out the doorway openings. Remember to save the cutout piece for the back of the door. Then mark out the second doorway opening and cut it out using a circular saw. With all the T111 sheeting up, we can go back and nail it all off according to the manufacturer's nail pattern. Then we can mark those corners and cut them off with a circular saw. There's many different ways that we can finish off that top gable piece. The way we did it was cut one last sheet of T111 siding in half lengthwise. Then we placed it on the gable opening and traced it with a pencil. Then we cut along the traced pencil lines. And nailed it up. We did the same process for the back. With all of the sheeting done, now we can start working on the roofing. Measure and cut 2 2x4s the entire length of the shed, and then attach the 2x4s to the top outside of the shed. The top outside corner of the 2x4 should be in the same angle as the roof rafters, so when we put plywood on the roof, it smoothly transitions from the rafter to the top edge of this 2x4. Once both sides are done, trim out the gable by starting with one edge at the 23 degrees and the other edge run long. Attach the second. We're using the 3-inch screws, but you could also use framing nails. Now we'll go ahead and cut the excess off in place. This method gives us a neat overhang that's also very compact and easy to do. Now for the roof sheathing, we're going to add a block just to help us put the plywood up on top. Start with the first full sheet and line it up with the stud pattern so one edge is on the outside and the other edge falls right in the middle of the second to last rafter. Nail on with the 8D nails. Cut additional pieces to fit in. If you're careful and smart with your plywood layout, which is detailed in the plans, you can get all this done in 3 sheets of plywood. Well, we've got the roof done and trimmed. Now let's trim out the corners and doorway. For the shed trim, we're using 1x4s, but you can also use a composite trim. Measure and cut the sides to fit and nail it on so that it's flush with the front of the shed. Then for the front and the back, cut the top angle at 23 degrees to match the top and attach it. You can use the 8D nails here or a 2-inch galvanized nail in an 18 gauge brad nailer or a 16 gauge brad nailer. You can also use trim screws. Measure and cut the trim for the doorway and carefully attach it. Then add the trim on top. We are ready for doors. For the doors, we'll use the scrap cutout from the T111 on the front. We'll frame it in 2x4s. We made the door overall about a 1/2 inch smaller than the opening to allow it to easily swing open and shut. We're using the 3-inch construction screws to build the door framing. This is all detailed out very clearly in the plans. Take opposite diagonals of the door frame to make sure it's square and adjust as necessary. You'll need to cut the T111 scrap pieces down in size to fit the door framing. Be very careful to do this where you maintain square edges. Always try to measure and work off of a factory edge. But don't forget you want to orientate the T111 piece so it matches the grooves in the siding. When happy, nail it to the 2x4 framing with the 8D nails. You can trim the entire door out now or do partial trimming like we're doing here. Go ahead and install the hinges now. To hang the door, place some 1/4 inch blocking on the floor of the shed and set the door in place on top of the shims. When happy with the door location, attach in a couple spots with screws. Make sure the door opens and closes easily before continuing to attach all the screws and the hinges. Hang the second door in the same method. We chose to trim the doorway afterwards just in case there was a big gap in the center, but the doors ended up working out perfectly, and we should have just trimmed them all out when they were flat on the sawhorses. To keep the doors from pushing in, just take a scrap piece of wood and screw it to the inside as a door stop. Then we went ahead and finished trimming out the door. The doors turned out really great and we're very pleased with them and confident that in the plans you'll be happy with them too. Before we add the roofing, we're going to go ahead and paint. We're going to roll it on. This shed took right at a gallon of paint per coat. Rolling's pretty easy, just roll it on and then go back with the brush and get in the grooves. In hindsight, I wish that I had pre-painted the doors before hanging them. With the paint on, now we're going to work on the roofing. With it all painted, we can start adding the roof flashing. Drip edge is available off the shelf and it's very inexpensive. We actually spray painted it black to match the roofing. Attach it using roofing nails. Next is the roofing underlayment. Once that's on, we can do the flashing on the rake ends of the roof. We are finally ready for shingles. We simply follow the instructions on the shingle packets to install all of the shingles. We love the ease of installation, the limited tool set needed, and the way the final shingled roof looks. All right, the plans are linked in the description. Take a look at them, and if you build this, please share because we'd love to see how your shed turns out.